Good day to all of you. My name is Anja Krummeij. I'm professor in Global Health and Education at Maastricht University. I have a background in social and medical anthropology, and as an anthropologist, I almost exclusively conduct my research by using or collecting qualitative data. Today I'm going to talk about how qualitative data can be analyzed, how you analyze them. And based on my experience of over 35 years in the field, I'll give you a practical overview that doesn't necessarily overlap with the types of qualitative data analysis that we come across in the handbooks. It is based on my practical experiences and gives you a rough overview on how to go about it, in addition to what you might find in different handbooks. Qualitative data include a lot of different kind of data. And in the first place, of course, there is written text. And this can include the transcript of your interviews, in which you have a full transcription. Every single every single word, cough, laugh, etc. will be typed or will be transcribed into your interview record. You can have summaries of interviews, or in both cases about focus group discussions. You can have stories, narratives about events, about lives. You can have diaries. People that were involved in your study could have kept diaries for you, recording everyday life events. There can be life histories, but there can also be formal documents, such as minutes of meetings, reports, articles. There can be local tales, local stories, local myth, local fairy tales. There can be texts of local songs. There is a broad possibilities of materials that you can collect in the context of qualitative research. In addition to what is written or what is being transcribed, you can also have visual materials, audio materials, pictures, videos, films, and any other kind of thing that you can think of, websites, all kind of new technologies that will bring you material and data. Now, if you look at the analysis of qualitative data, you could say that there are several types of analysis, and I'll mention here only a few. If you would really study all the handbooks, you'll probably come across quite a few more. But these are the more or less more commonly used. First of all, you have the narrative analysis, in which you look at a text or an interview, or the things that people try to tell you or try to make you understand are presented to you in the form of a kind of a story, and a story that has a culprit, that has a hero, a story that has a plot, a story that has a particular structure, and the way the structure and the story is being told to you, in that way you can find a lot of information about what the people who tell you the story think, what is good, what is bad, what are the norms and values underlying the story, and it's in the way they tell it to you. A second way of doing an analysis is a discourse analysis, in which you take a particular text, mostly a written text, but it could also be the transcript of a conversation or an interview, and you can look at the discourse. How do people present their points? What are the underlying assumptions of what they tell you? What are the core ideas and the core concepts in what they tell you? So you look not directly literally what people tell you, but what the underlying meaning is and the underlying assumptions that are presented to you in the way they give you their information, or the information is presented or given. A third way, a third type of analysis that is not often used, is a very specialized way of analyzing. That is how within text, by combining words, by using particular types of grammar, by combining words, by referring or not referring. Within the text, very much on the textual basis, you look at how meaning in those sentences, in the use of words, is being constructed. And as I said, this is a possibility, but not one that is often used in public health or health education or global health research. Then there is a form of analysis that we can that makes use of theoretical starting points. You have a theoretical framework or a theoretical underpinning of your work, and you use that as a basis for as a basic structure for your analysis. And the same goes actually for the framework analysis. Both the theoretical and the framework analysis are really very much have a lot in common. In the theoretical analysis, you make use of theoretical starting points in a general way. In the framework, you make use of concepts from your theoretical work that have been brought together in a framework, in a picture, a scheme. Then you have thematic analysis, and there you start in a looser way. You may be inspired by theoretical notions. However, you start from what is actually being offered to you in the text, in your interviews, in the minutes, in the journals, in the texts that you use to analyze. And this thematic analysis is the idea here is that you create themes and based on the information in your data. So you don't start really with checking your data whether they have anything to say about your theoretical concepts, but you look at your data in the sense that what are they telling me about the phenomena that I want to study, and then later you make a theoretical framework out of that. So you don't start with a theoretical framework, but you end with it. And that is actually also the case in grounded theory. There is slight difference between thematic and grounded theory analysis, but both start from a far looser theoretical framework than the theoretical analysis and the framework analysis. But I'll tell you a little bit more about that later in this presentation. Another way to categorize, rather than according to the types of analysis that I talked about in relation to the previous slide, is another way of categorizing the way you analyze, and that could be intuitive, procedural, metaphorical, or intersubjective. In an intuitive way, you make actually use of the experience, the expertise, the theoretical knowledge and the insights you have been building up as a researcher in the previous years. And looking at your data, your interview text, for instance, you immediately start to see interesting things. Interesting because they somehow contrast very much with what you expected based on your experience. They may overlap, especially very much with what you already knew, and in both cases, whether they are really confirming or really contrasting with what you already know, you see those patterns. So you use your experience, your expertise to look at your text, and based on that you will immediately have an eye for things that are interesting, that stand out for all kinds of reasons. If you don't trust your intuition, or if you do not have a lot of experience yet, or whether you want to just be sure that you do it systematically and precise, you can also go for a really step-by-step procedural approach, in which you use the steps that you find in a handbook, or for instance in this lecture, very precisely, and make sure that you do all the steps as they are prescribed. So in that case, that's kind of in contrast to the intuitive thing, in which you rather make use of what you already broadly know and compare. Then you can also do a metaphorical analysis, and this is often done by researchers who want to be a bit more, new, playful. You can, for instance, come up with a metaphor, let's say a tree, and then you look at your data and you imagine a tree. And you say, well, these pieces of information belong to the stem, but on the top there are big branches, and together they come together in the stem. But these big branches are, part of the tree that on the one hand are connected in the stem, but represent several dimensions of your research. And then you could have smaller branches on each of those bigger branches, and twigs on each of the smaller branches in the bigger branches, and leaves. And that is how you could organize, according to the image and the picture of a tree, you can then organize all your data. You can also use the metaphor of a train or travel. You can use, I have once seen a student using the metaphor of a giraffe with a long neck and thin legs, etc. So if you, or I know, for instance, of a researcher who uses the metaphor of a river, where people float on the river trying not to fall off the waterfall in the end, and they can have all kind of devices to not fall off the metaphor. There may be sandbags that keep them safe for a while, and you can use all these kind of images to organize your data in with the structure of a story that is easy to get across, for instance, to the people who will later read about your data analysis. You can also use an intersubjective method in which you organize some kind of dialogue with either your audience, the people who were in your study, or colleagues, in which you kind of set up a dialogue in which you discuss your findings, and in which you can, for instance, come to a common intuitive approach, a common procedural approach, a common metaphorical approach, but in interaction with either your audience, colleagues, peers, or all of them together. So these are other ways, again, compared to this slide, to look at the types of analysis that are at your disposal. Intuition, procedure, metaphors, intersubjectivity. But no matter how you try to categorize ways in which you can do data analysis in qualitative research, like always in qualitative research, this is actually quite a messy process. So very often you will find yourself somewhere in between an intuitive or metaphorical approach, or an intersubjective and a procedural approach. Sometimes you jump from one to the other. Also at this level you can have mixes. You can have a part in your study that is thematic and a part in your study that is theoretical. However, it's still good to know that these are different approaches to data analysis that you can pick from. They are not necessarily related to your paradigms. They are at your disposal. They are all part of a big toolkit of analytical approaches and tools that you, of a qualitative researcher, can have. So it's always a messy process of going backwards and forwards in your data, in which you sometimes get an idea, and that idea might lead to a completely new way of analyzing and a restructuring of your analysis. It's trial and error. Very much doing qualitative research analysis, or analysis in qualitative research, is a matter of learning by doing. It means that what I want to say there is, although you can listen to my story and my presentation, although you can read a lot of chapters and a lot of handbooks on qualitative data analysis, in the end it is you, your brain, who will see patterns, who will see categories, who will have to decide what pieces of your data have a particular meaning and how they relate to each other. So it is you who decides about that. It's you who craft and create and construct an analysis, an interpretation of your data. And the more you do it, the well, I can't say the easier it becomes. It will be always very difficult, but you will be learning to deal or to accept the difficulties and the confusion that you will experience at the beginning of such a journey. And then slowly but gradually you will get into it. You will see some patterns. You will, and then the veil of chaos may lift, and you start to see what is related to what are interesting patterns, etc. But having said that, another person may find other patterns, may see other things in the data. And that is not a problem in qualitative research. It's again something that you need to learn to accept and not to be afraid of. You are the one in charge, and your brain is your own and your only tool for doing such a data analysis. And as I said, it is possible to try to explain the process, but in the end it is you who have to undergo it, and it is your analytical skills, your analytical capabilities, your brain, that is responsible for the outcome of your analysis, and no procedural advices or structures can really in the end help you. I will talk about two approaches today, two rough approaches today in qualitative research that are equally often used, although the first one I would always advise to people who are relatively new in the field of qualitative data analysis. First, I will talk about the framework, or maybe also a bit about, and as such also a bit about the theoretical analysis that is theory-driven. You use concepts, theories, theoretical frameworks, structures that you found in your literature as a starting point for your analysis. A second approach is the thematic approach, or sometimes also linked to the grounded theory approach, which is data-driven. There you start with your data, and your data by looking for patterns, categories, etc., concepts and relationships between concepts help you to build a theory. They help you to ground a theory in your data, hence the term grounded theory. Excuses for the misspelling in this slide. Should be grounded, not grounded. So two approaches, one starting from theory, the other starting from the data. And again, in reality, it is not always so clear cut. But let's start with approach one, the framework analysis. As I maybe tried to explain already, there is no right way to do this. It is up to you and your brain and your expertise and your literature, etc. that you used. But what all these different ways of doing framework analysis have in common is that they need to be systematic. So you have piles and piles of data, transcripts of interviews. You may have minutes of meetings, you may have journals, you may have song texts, you may have web pages, Facebook pages, or whatever that you want to analyze. And what you actually are supposed to do is to order that whole pile of information by using categories, by labeling them, these categories, by giving names to these categories or concepts, by comparing, by contrasting, etc. So this whole pile of wild, chaotic information, data, need to be organized. And as you do so, you kind of, find your way in these data, and by doing so, you do what we call data reduction. You will end up with data that fit neatly in categories, boxes, etc. And these boxes can be the boxes that you make, the decisions that you make by, for instance, determining what categories there are and what belongs to what category, can be inspired by the theory that you use as a starting point, but it can also be used to build theory, but I'll come back to that a bit later. You could say that in a very simplistic way, you could say that let's say you want to move house, you want to move to another place. And to do so, you have a bit of an, unorthodox way of doing that, and you put everything that is in your house, in your current house, you put in the lawn, on the grass, in front of your house. So everything that's there. So you end up with a big pile of unorganized items and things. And then you have to put those in boxes, because you need to have them in boxes when you move them to the other place. And then you pick up the first item. And that item could be an old sock with a hole in it. So what is that old sock? Where do I put it? Do I have a box where it fits? If it doesn't fit in any of the boxes, you have only one sock and it has a hole, you may want to just simply throw it in the dustbin. But, because it doesn't fit anywhere and it is not of any use. But it could also be the sock that you were wearing when you won a championship as a kid. And it's a memorabilia. It reminds you. It reminds you of that day, and it may want to be getting a nice place on the wall in your new house. So maybe there's a box memorabilia. So you put the sock in the box memorabilia. It could also be that you threw it in the dustbin, but you still think it's a good sock. Later in the pile you find another sock. You think, I can fix them. I put them in a box like things to determine later. The next item might be that you pick from the big pile might be, let's say, a teapot. And it's good, it's nice, it's you only recently bought it, it's modern, it's hip, and you want to have it. So you put it in the box, let's say, for your kitchen, because you already have an idea what your new house looks like. It could be for the kitchen, it could be for the combination kitchen living room, it could be for your guest room, and the boxes that you have in your lawn actually already represent what you expect to be relevant for the new house, for the new place. So you pre-label the boxes, you have pre-labeled the boxes already with your knowledge of the new place and its and the way it's laid out in mind. So you know the number of kitchen rooms, you know whether you have a kitchen or whether the kitchen is part of the living room, you know whether you have an attic, you know whether you have a cellar, you know how many bedrooms you are, how many guest rooms, etc. And based on that knowledge, theoretical knowledge you could say, you have pre-labeled your boxes. And when you are then picking the items from your lawn that came from your old house, you have a set of boxes that are having the labels of the different spaces and places in your new house based on your knowledge, your theory, your framework of the new house. So that is theory based. It's also possible that you don't know yet where you're going and you just pick any kind of object, put it in the first box, put it in another box, and you make the labels and the logic as you go without having a pre-fixed idea of what kind of labels and boxes you will need in the end. And that is actually the inductive approach, whereas the first one is the theoretical approach. So in one case you have a theoretical framework, as we discussed also earlier in this course. You have a theoretical framework, you know what kind of dimensions, categories, issues are important, you label your boxes accordingly. And in the other case you don't have, and you make your boxes while looking at the pile. So when you pick up a sock with a hole in it, you know it is this sock that reminds you of a time that you were a winner, and you put it in a box that could be a memorabilia or good memories or winning or whatever, and then you pick the teapot and you say, okay, well this is cookingware or anything. So you make the categories as you go without a particular new place in mind. So I hope that makes a bit of sense. Now, this framework-based analysis, you could say, comes in 5 phases. And at least that is the way I order it. Handbooks on data analysis may, have divided this whole process in different steps, in different phases, more or less or the same. But this is how, after my many years of experience, how I would organize these phases. First, there's the preparation, pre-analysis, analysis, check of your analysis, and then theory development, even in the framework approach, but I'll talk about that later. Now let's say phase 1, the preparation. The preparation comes in 4 steps. First, you have to make sure that you have transcriptions of all the texts and all the material that you want to use for your analysis. This could be interview text, transcriptions of interview text, but it could be also the text that the text that you already that you collected for your research in terms of journal articles, websites, etc., etc. And you make sure that these texts are easily accessible, for instance, by giving them a large margin, if that's possible, or for instance, by numbering every line in them so that it is easy for you to find your way in those texts to find back what you have been looking at before by numbering, but also a large margin that gives you the opportunity to write things in the margin. So once you have done that, you have all your material in an accessible way in front of you, either in your computer or in paper on your table, which is the way I always like to do it. And you have all these texts easily accessible, and then you put them to rest for some time, while you carefully read and reread the aim and the research questions that were in the proposal. That were in the proposal of your study with regard to this particular qualitative part, or with regard to all the qualitative parts. So you carefully reread aim, research questions, etc. What did I want to do? Why did I want to do it? What was the relevance, etc. So that you really, because after a period of collecting qualitative data, you often forgot about the aim and the questions that you wanted to answer. You've been so involved with communicating, with interviewing, with talking to the people in your study, that you may have gotten a bit distant from the original aims and questions. So while you do that, you refreshen your starting points. What was my paradigm? Why did I pick this? What was my theoretical starting points? And as we discussed, theory and paradigm. Theory is very possible to put under a paradigm as long as the theory fits with the paradigm. So what was my paradigm? What were my theories? What were my starting points in general, etc. And maybe it's a good idea to see if you can visualize that in a particular framework, like the one I presented here. And let's say in the center, the box in the center that all the other arrows point to is the topic of your study. Let's say what determines the well-being of elderly in traditional living arrangements in the northern part of the country. And with traditional living arrangements, I mean extended families. So what determines the well-being of those elderly? And that could be, all these boxes, they represent different dimensions. Could be a relationship with their kids, could be loneliness, could be belonging to a church or belonging to clubs, or so all kind of being able to go out of the house, etc. So what you learned from your theoretical, from your literature search, you try to schematize, visualize in a framework like that. It's not compulsory, but it's not a bad idea to do that. So this is kind of representing all the dimensions, not only in your theoretical framework and your starting point, but also how they are connected and how they shape and influence each other. So theoretical framework, as I said, picked, fitting with the paradigm, if possible, that you wanted to use. So once you have done that, you start with the first very, very early step in your analysis. And so after having done this, you kind of made yourself into a theoretical animal with a theoretical intuition. You refreshened all your starting points, all your ideas, all your expectations. You know why you did your study, what you wanted to involve, what your ideas were when you started to do this, what the ideas were, what kind of ideas were underlying your data collection, your interview questions and everything. And then you put that to rest again, a little bit. And what you then do, you go back to the transcriptions and the text, the access that you made accessible, and you read those concentrated and open-minded. And with open-minded, I mean not necessarily forcing yourself to think in terms of concepts, actually forcing yourself to forget a little bit about your theory. You have trained yourself as a theoretical animal, that should be enough. But you try to read them as open-minded as you can without using theory in this pre-analytical phase. And while doing that, you try to form yourself, to form an idea for yourself of the kind of topics, the range of topics and issues that the interviews and the other texts that you want to analyze bring up. What kind of issues do they talk about? What do they present? What kind of image do they present? What kind of ideas are there? And by doing that, to get an idea of the range of topics and issues that are being brought up or discussed in the data, you try in this early phase to stay as close to to everyday experience and language as used in the texts themselves. So you stay close to what the people tell you. They talk about everyday life situations, they talk about fights, they talk about happiness, they talk about things that, that caught their attention, that upset them, that made them happy, that they noticed, that were surprising, etc. So they will talk about everyday things in everyday language, about emotions, experiences, etc. So you try to stay as close as you can to what they say and how they say it. And then in these margins that you made in the text, or the space that you created in the text, in your transcriptions, you make notes of these topic issues. You could do that on a notebook, but you can at the same time write in the margins of the text small indicators. So what is this section about? What is being discussed here? What is the major takeaway of this particular piece of text? And there you use your own words, or at least words from the informant in normal language. So no theorizing or conceptualizing yet, just normal language. And if, for instance, a very simple example, if in the interview you interview a woman about her relationship with her husband, you say, for instance, and she talks about how she had a fight with her husband the other week. In the margin you write something like fight with husband, lost the fight with husband, or is still angry. Things that are can't forget about the fight. So things that are really close to what the material itself tells you. Later, later you may want to say this is an example of power hierarchies, or of gender relations, or social construction of husbands, or whatever. So in the beginning you just use normal language. Conceptual things will come later, not in this phase yet. And then after you have done that for all your material, it's a lot of work, and you will see that while you do that, you sometimes need to go back, because a label that you gave to a particular piece of text, and you come across something similar in another piece of text, will make you rethink the word that you use. And you may want to say, instead of fight, something else, like uneasiness, or conflict, or conflicting ideas, or whatever. So, but you still stay as much as possible with your material. And then when you have done that, you read the material again, looking at the notes, and to see if you still agree with how you typified, using the language from the texts themselves, how you typified, if you still agree with that and if it makes sense. And based on that, you adjust your remarks in the margins. Pre-analysis. Not a lot of theory here yet. Then at the end of this phase, when you're satisfied with how you did it and think, well, I can live with this. This makes sense. Then you start to order all these little things that you wrote in the margins, all these little words and indicators. You start to order them, and you start to look for bigger categories. So when you came across a conflict or a fight with a husband, you may find other examples of where there was uneasiness, maybe not only with husband, but other men. Or so you try to see, not using theory yet, if these small indicators can be put in boxes or in heaps, small heaps together, like the heaps on the lawn. So no box, but a heap. And then you have to have a logic why they fit together, and based off that logic, the logic underlying your categorizing this way, based on that logic you select quotes from the interviews and the texts that illustrate these categories and that illustrate the underlying logic. Once you have categorized and small heaps, you also look for patterns. Are there recurrent relationships between the phenomena and the concepts in your interviews? How are they related? When a woman talks about fights with her husband, is this in the context of a larger family relationships? Is this always about her work, or is it always about the kids? And then you can see, well, there's categories. There's conflicts about kids, there's conflicts about livelihood and work, there's conflicts about other things. So you start to organize and look for patterns and see if there's recurring relations between phenomena and concepts that you see happening in the interviews. And when you see patterns, a bit more, the categories is what are things that being said about a particular topic. First, in the patterns, you look at how are particular topics related to each other. Do I see patterns there? And again, do I see, concepts there? Concepts, everyday language concepts still. And again, you select illustrative quotes. And in the end, you should have quotes. You should be able to have quotes that show the logic of your categorization and of the patterns that you found. And if I would put all those quotes one after the other and show it to a colleague, the colleague should actually be able to more or less see the line of reasoning going through those quotes, the underlying idea and organization of these quotes. So then, when you've done that, when you've organized in categories and in patterns, and you have quotes for all the things that you think are interesting, you look at it again, and then you think, okay, now I have all these findings, all these quotes, all these patterns. What is interesting, surprising, unexpected, expected in those patterns? And here, actually, for the first time, you allow yourself to be surprised or flabbergasted or wondering, or, because these quotes, these patterns, these categories may be completely overlapping the framework that you started with, this one, and the ideas. But it could also be, it could also be that they do not fit that framework. And what strikes you as interesting, surprising, unexpected, or expected is actually because you trained yourself to be a theoretical being, a theoretical, intuitive, theoretical person. And because you did that in pre-phase 1, you are able to see what in this everyday ordering and patterns is interesting, is surprising. Where does it deviate from your theoretical frameworks, from your expectations? Where does it really strongly confirm it? And by doing that, you kind of compare these wild findings based on everyday language and everyday everyday phenomena. You start to bring them in connection to your theoretical work, to your theoretical starting points, your framework. And so you look at everything that's interesting, surprising, etc., and start to look at how do my findings actually fit the framework that I started with? Are they really fitting in the boxes? So you have these piles on the grass and the patterns and the categories, and there you have all your prefab boxes, and then you look, do my heaps actually really fit in those boxes? Do they really fit? Are the patterns and the categories that I created based on my quotes and on my material, on the wild and raw material, do they fit the framework? And then you and this third phase of analysis with rearranging, if necessary, your initial framework based on these findings and these quotes. So this one may need adjustment based on what you found in your materials. And you do this. So you end up with a new framework. If that is the case, it is possible that your findings perfectly fit with your framework, but don't take that for granted. Don't accept that too easily. It is also possible, for instance, that one of these boxes says gender. But then when you look at here, you realize that gender is indeed playing a role, but maybe in a bit of a different way than you originally thought, or in more ways than you originally thought. And that may mean that the category gender in your new framework needs to be adjusted, needs to be separated in several types of ways in which gender can play a role, or other elements or dimensions in which gender play a role than you had in your original framework. So you rearrange your initial framework, you adjust it, you refine it based on this first stage phase of analysis. And then you go to a next phase, phase 4. And phase 4 is an attempt to confirm the new framework that came out, or the adjusted or not adjusted, because it was already perfect framework that comes out at the end of phase 3. In phase 4, you check your analysis to see if it stays, if it can stay up, or it can withstand a critical analysis. So what you do in phase 4 to check your analysis is to actively look for deviant connections, patterns, and elements that do not fit immediately in your newly formed framework. So what you try to do is you go through your material again and you actively try to find evidence that this new framework is still not perfect. So you are going to look, do the concepts you use in your new framework cover all the things that you found? Are the patterns that I found really always, do they always count, or are there other patterns that I have overlooked? Did I misunderstand myself? And by asking all these critical questions of your analysis in relation to your material, you check your analysis, and based on that you have to decide whether it needs more adjustment, or whether you may need to start all over, which is also a possibility, or whether you just have to adjust or rebuild the framework. And that is phase 4. Checking the analysis, ending up with an adjusted initial framework that has been rearranged in phase 3, adjusted on the basis of phase 4, looking actively for cases in which the material contradicts or doesn't fit the new framework that you made here, by doing these kind of things. Now then, in phase 5, we start to look to theory development. And although I said that this approach, this framework approach, starts from theory, as you already noticed, it isn't only starting from theory, but in the analysis, in the procedure, in the process of data analysis, you do a lot of theoretical work. You also actually check whether your original theoretical framework can stand a critical scrutinization based on your data. So what you do, you compare your new framework here in this phase with the one that you started with in your proposal in the very early beginnings. And you compare it with the starting points of the beginning with the theoretical and the theoretical assumptions, the assumptions in your paradigms, with the findings now, with the new framework. And you have to look at, okay, in what extent is my new framework differing or overlapping with what I originally thought? And what does this have for the, what consequences does this have for the original framework? Does it need new concept, patterns, connection? Does it need to be rejected? Does it need to be replaced? And what does this all imply for your research questions? Can you answer them? Or are your research questions actually still standing? Do you have to maybe even rephrase your research questions? And if so, how? Because it is possible that your theoretical work during the analysis really is so strongly contradicting what you started with, and has so many other dimensions that the framework hadn't taken into account, that you may need to even revamp your research questions. And that is at the end of this phase, that is the questions that you deal with. So you start with a theoretical framework, you analyze your data more or less wild, you make a new framework based on that, you then check whether it fits with your theoretical starting point, concept, etc. that you came upon during your research, your literature review and the literature search that you did in the beginning. And now you're going to see whether the theoretical starting points that you came up with on the base of your data still are comparable with the starting points. So you start with theory, but you end with refined or adjusted theory, or with the same if your data do not add anything new, which actually would be a bit of a pity. It's more spectacular if they don't. So step 5 is about theory development. In phase 5 ends with theory development. You develop a new abstract theory or model that is relevant for other researchers. This could be a model that in principle could be the same as the one that you started with, but it would be actually more interesting if you have something to add to the model, if you can refine it, build extra elements in it, if you can reject it and replace it by a much better one. And by doing this, by developing theory, by comparing your new findings with what was already known, you add to the theoretical debate in your field. So that is the goal if you are doing qualitative research within the academic context. You add you contribute to the theoretical debate in your field by doing these steps. So that is the starting point and the end point of the framework. Now, I also mentioned approach 2, where the framework is to be developed during the process of development. Here, you don't start with a thematic analysis, you don't refresh your theoretical starting points, etc. all you may refresh is the reasons why you wanted to do an explorative study or a grounded theory that is not based on an extensive literature search. Later in this course, or before in this course, grounded theory will extensively cover it, but grounded theory means an approach in qualitative research that starts without too much theoretical preparation and is going hand in hand with this thematic analysis. And in both thematic analysis and grounded theory, the idea is that you skip the theoretical work, the extensive theoretical work in the beginning of the study, the literature search, etc. But you have some ideas, of course, what you want to do and why you want to do it, but you want to be as open as possible, so you don't have too many concepts and approaches yet. And so you follow all the steps as in approach 1. You make sure you have your transcripts accessible, but you do not refreshen your theoretical and your paradigmatic starting points, because they are less important here. So you do all the work, you look at your text, you write words in the margin, indicators using everyday language. You start to look for patterns and categories and recurring patterns and categories. You make a framework, and not one that is looking back to the one that you started with, but a brand new one made based on your data only. And once you have created that new framework, you use phase 4 to test your new framework using the transcripts normally, to see if your new framework, like I described for phase 4, the check of your analysis, you use your new framework and you use your transcript to test your new framework and see if it needs adjustment. And then you go to phase 5 as in approach 1, where you look at to this step in the theory development, you develop an abstract theory based on your data only, not in comparison with theoretical starting points that much. And in that way, again, you add to the theoretical debate in your field. Grounded theory also encompasses what we call the grounded theory. And different from the thematic analysis, where you test your new framework using the transcript and then add to the theoretical debate, in grounded theory you are supposed to develop hypotheses or expectations. We already discussed somewhere else in this course that hypothesis is maybe not the best word to use in qualitative research, but let's say expectations. So after the check in phase 4, you have a new framework, a newly made framework, and based on that framework you can develop a few expectations. If this is the case, I think this and this is a normal recurring pattern, this will happen when this happens, etc. So you come up with hypotheses, you write them down, and in thematic analysis you go back to your transcripts to check, but in grounded theory you may actually go back in the field to collect new data to check these expectations that you got on the basis of the first round of data collection. So in grounded theory you may have several rounds of data collection. So the first round you make a framework, you base all kind of expectations on them. You go back into the field to collect more data to see if these expectations that you based on the first round of data collection, whether they can stand the test of another round of data collection in which you try to falsify them. And then again, phase 5, develop an abstract theory that is relevant for other researchers, through which you add to the theoretical debate in your field. This means that both approaches, the one in which the theory-driven approach, where you use a framework or a theoretical starting points to analyze your data, or this second approach in which you try to ground new theory in the field, in wild and raw data. Both approaches are actually what we call heuristic. And that means that they both have the goal of building or adding or contributing to existing insights and theories about a particular phenomena in your field or in your paradigm. So the idea is that both approaches, instead of being representative, giving information about the reality in an independent world, independent reality, this is about refining, adding to theoretical debates, and it's not to find the truth or the law of nature about the phenomena that you study. You just add to the theoretical discussion. So in qualitative research there is no external representativity. So what you find in your qualitative study is not supposed to be true for the entire world population, for instance. It is what you find will add to the knowledge, will add to the in-depth knowledge of the phenomena that you study. And that's what we call heuristic. So it's not about discovering the laws of nature about the phenomena that you study, but about gaining in-depth insight in specific phenomena in interaction with their natural context. And this replaces in qualitative research, in a way, the external representativity of quantitative research, in which you try to find truth within your study population, but the truth that you find in your study population should actually be also the truth about the entire world population. So there's a bit of a difference. So the external representativity in qualitative research is very different from in quantitative, where it is supposed to find the truth about everybody, where here it is find more and more insight in a particular, in-depth insight in a particular phenomena. And that is as far as I would like to talk about data collection or data analysis in qualitative research for today. Thank you all very much for your attention. Have fun with trying to analyze data in the future.